Right now, basically 62% of America has just quietly walked off the political battlefield.
Yeah, which is incredible when you think about it.
It really is. I mean, if you just look at the news right now, in the middle of 2026, you see a country that seems locked in this constant, deafening shouting match, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Every headline is a crisis.
Right. Every single debate is framed as this, existential threat. But we've been digging through this massive stack of sources. Today we've got economic data, political briefings, some really fascinating Stanford research, and a totally different reality emerges from the numbers.
It really does. It's a massive blind spot in how we understand ourselves right now.
Yeah.
We pay so much attention to the sheer volume of the extremes that we're completely missing the structural, intentional disengagement of most of the population.
Exactly. The most important story in the country isn't the shouting, it's the silence.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. In this deep dive into the sources, we are looking at a group that sociologists and pollsters are calling the mixed middle. This is that 62% of the country that has basically unplugged from the national discourse. We really need to look at the massive external economic shock that drove them away and, how their absence is basically allowing these radicalized fringes to completely dictate the national narrative.
Right. But to figure out why the majority is tuning out, we first have to look at the baseline level of trust in the system itself.
Yeah, because that baseline is rough right now.
It really is. That's the foundation of all of this. I mean, we are rapidly approaching the 250th anniversary of the United States, the Semiquincentennial.
Which is a word I always struggle to say.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But when you look at the data heading into this milestone, it paints a really stark picture of how Americans view the core agreements of the country.
Yeah, like the National Archives points to 3 specific documents as the Charters of Freedom, right? The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And these weren't just meant to be like historical artifacts under glass. They were designed to be the ultimate arbiters of conflict. They're literally the rule book for how we disagree without, tearing the house down.
Exactly. And yet, there's this recent Gallup-backed survey from June 2026, and it found that 77% of Americans believe the founders would be disappointed in the current state of the republic.
Wow. 77%. That's massive.
It is. Think about the weight of that number. That is a profound level of civilizational disappointment, really.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond being unhappy with a specific tax policy or disliking whoever is sitting in the Oval Office. People are losing faith in the shared belief that our national institutions are even capable of fairly resolving modern conflicts.
And the approval ratings back that up in a pretty terrifying way, honestly. Like, congressional approval is sitting at 10%.
10%. Just let that sink in.
Right. That means if you walk down the street, 9 out of 10 people you pass think the legislative branch of the government is fundamentally broken. And it gets worse. Trust in the federal government to do what is right most of the time is down to 17%.
And mass media isn't doing any better.
No, not at all. Trust there has plummeted to a new low of 28%.
Which brings us to a really interesting concept in the research called the legitimacy recession.
A legitimacy recession. Okay, break that down for me.
So a legitimacy recession happens when the shared belief that institutions can, arbitrate reality degrades much faster than the institutions themselves actually fail.
Oh, I see.
Like the courts, the state governments, the election boards, mechanically, they're still processing paperwork. They're still holding votes. The lights are on.
People are still showing up to work.
Exactly. But the legitimacy granted to them by the public has just completely evaporated.
So it's basically like, it's like watching a sports game where the fans haven't just decided to boo a bad call from the referee. They've collectively decided the referee is on the take, the rule book is entirely made up, and the scoreboard is rigged.
That is a perfect analogy.
And once you believe the game is rigged, you stop playing by the rules.
Yeah.
Or I guess you just pack up your things and leave the stadium entirely.
That is the exact dynamic we're seeing.
Yeah.
If everyone has lost faith in the referees, we have to look at who is actually still on the field playing the game.
Right.
And the Pew Research Center's typology, well, the briefing, adapts their classic models. It provides a really clear breakdown of how the electorate is structurally divided right now.
Which completely flips the script on that whole red versus blue myth we get fed constantly on TV. The country isn't actually split cleanly down the middle into 2 warring ideological armies.
Not at all. Structurally, the public basically boils down to 2 main behavioral camps. On one side, you have the ideological anchors,
Okay.
They make up about 38% of the public. They are highly engaged. They are ideologically consistent on either the far left or the far right. And they possess this really intense interest in political discourse.
So they're the ones driving the visible polarization. They're the ones posting, donating, showing up to primaries.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have the mixed middle, making up the vast majority at 62%.
The 62%, the silent majority we were
Now,
talking about.
the data shows they are cross-pressured, they hold mixed views, and they clearly value pragmatic day-to-day governance over, abstract culture wars.
The sources also point out this group isn't just one big monolith, right? Like, they break it down further.
Yeah, the research highlights a subgroup called the Order and Opportunity Left, which is actually the single largest voting bloc in the entire country right now at roughly 18%.
Wow. 18%. What do they care about?
They are economically liberal, so they want material relief and opportunity, but they are also deeply concerned about crime and border order.
So they really don't fit neatly onto a partisan bumper sticker.
Not at all. And then you also have the tuned out middle, which kind of exemplifies this current era of disengagement.
That's their deal.
They have almost zero participation in activism, very low media consumption, and a really deep-seated belief that the system simply does not respond to them. Just look back at the 2024 elections. This group had only a 32% voter turnout.
Okay, let me stop you there, because this brings up something in the research that I really struggled with when I was reading it.
Okay, what's that?
If 62% of the country, the overwhelming majority, is frustrated and cross-pressured, why wouldn't they just vote out the extremes? Like, why not just elect moderates, fix the problem, and get things back on track? Walking off the field entirely seems completely counterintuitive when you literally have the numbers to win the game.
It does seem counterintuitive. What's fascinating here is that we often assume engagement is just a matter of willpower, right?
Yeah.
We hear this media narrative that the highly engaged 38% of the anchors somehow marginalized or bullied the middle out of the conversation.
That's definitely the story you hear.
But the data shows an agency inversion.
An agency inversion.
Yeah, meaning the middle wasn't pushed. They voluntarily walked away. The extremes didn't seize the field from a moderate majority that was desperately fighting to participate.
Yeah.
The extremes simply stepped into a massive vacuum that the middle actively abandoned.
But why abandon it? Like, what was the breaking point that made 62% of the country throw their hands up and say, I'm out?
To understand that, we had to look past the political theater and examine the actual economic substrate of the country.
Okay.
There was a highly specific, acute material shock that broke the middle's engagement in early 2026. We're talking about the military conflict with Iran and the resulting global fuel crisis.
Right. February 28, 2026, the conflict starts, and it triggers a massive disruption in the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly.
And for anyone who doesn't track global shipping, that strait is one of the most critical bottlenecks for global energy on the planet. The way that geopolitical shock transmitted into the daily lives of average Americans was just incredibly fast, and it was brutal.
It devastated household budgets almost overnight. I mean, the briefing cites Moody's, who estimated that the resulting energy spike placed a $100 billion extra burden on U.S. families.
$100 billion.
Yes. We saw gas prices shoot up more than $1 per gallon above pre-war levels, peaking near $4.44 a gallon.
Let's put this in human terms for a second, because $100 billion is a big abstract number.
Sure.
If you're an average household, suddenly your commute to work costs a third more. Your groceries cost more because the diesel required to ship them to the store costs more. You aren't thinking about who won a debate on cable news. You are literally doing mental math at the gas pump to see if you can afford to drive to work until Friday.
Absolutely. You are in survival mode.
And that energy shock just bled into everything. By May 2026, the Consumer Price Index hit 4.2% year over year. The energy index alone surged 23.5%.
Right, and we have to remember the baseline stress that was already there before this happened.
Oh, yeah.
This wasn't hitting an economy that was resting comfortably. You already had housing costs consuming 40% or more of median household incomes.
With 30-year mortgages hovering around 6.49%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Childcare was already averaging over $13,000 a year, which in many states is more than public college tuition.
That is just wild to me.
And residential electricity rates were already climbing too.
Yeah.
So when you combine that pre-existing structural strain with the sudden war-driven $100 billion fuel shock, The public mood just snapped.
Yeah, the Gallup Economic Confidence Index literally fell off a cliff, hitting -45 in May.
-45.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. We hear endless debates on the news about abstract culture wars and ideological shifts. But looking at the mechanisms of this data, it seems like the real fuel for all this national anger is literally fuel.
Yes.
It's a war-driven cost of living shock that forced a psychological shift from civic engagement to absolute survival mode.
That is the precise mechanism at play. Affordability pressure is the real substrate of the national mood. When basic daily survival, paying for energy, keeping your house, affording childcare becomes precarious, people naturally disconnect from national political theater.
They just don't have the energy for it.
Right. The cognitive load of surviving an inflation shock leaves no bandwidth for arguing about ideological purity. You just want the pain to stop.
So the 62% mixed middle is completely focused on just keeping their heads above water. They tune out. And because they tune out, the highly motivated 38%, the anchors, are left to completely dominate the narrative.
Exactly.
They're the ones organizing, protesting, and voting in these low-turnout primaries.
And because the anchors are setting the agenda without any moderate counterbalance, the political discourse shifts from how do we fix this specific problem to how do we completely overhaul the entire system.
Which brings us to the activist movements.
Yes, we see this very clearly in the rise of radical activism and the intersectional worldview driving modern progressive resistance.
And just to be clear for the listener, we're looking at the sociological data and the stated platforms of these groups in the sources. The briefing groups, networks like Antifa, pro-Palestine queer organizations, and the Democratic Socialists of America under this umbrella of an intersectional critique.
Right, we're just looking at their structural role here.
Yeah.
And while these are distinct groups with different immediate focuses, their communications rely on a shared systemic diagnosis.
Right.
They operate on an abolish or transform rationale rather than a traditional reform rationale. They view capitalism, institutionalized state power, and systemic hierarchies as interconnected oppressions.
Okay, let me translate that into a more grounded summary for a second to make sure I'm following the sources correctly.
Go for it.
So essentially, instead of looking at a broken policy like, say, a leaky pipe that needs a quick patch, these groups are saying the entire plumbing system of the house is fundamentally toxic and needs to be ripped out of the walls entirely. Is that accurate?
That's a perfect way to visualize it. Because they believe the core institutions of the state, the police, the courts, the markets, are inherently corrupt or captured by these oppressive systems. They argue that those institutions cannot be fixed from within.
The toxic plumbing can't be patched.
Exactly. This rationale justifies direct action outside of traditional legal and electoral frameworks.
Which we saw culminate in the No Kings protests.
Yes, the No Kings protests, which peaked in March 2026. The organizers estimated 8 million participants across the country.
8 million! That is a staggering scale of mobilization.
It is. They were driven by opposition to the Iran war, executive power expansion, and immigration enforcement. They were explicitly framing the executive branch as an authoritarian power that had to be resisted in the streets.
But then the briefing contrasts that national street activism with something happening at the city level, right?
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a fascinating secondary effect. When federal institutions lose their legitimacy and people feel the national plumbing is toxic, highly engaged voters don't just protest.
What do?
They turn their focus to the local level, where they can actually pull levers of power. This has led to a significant surge in what the sources call municipal socialism in high-cost cities.
And New York City is basically the primary proof of concept for this right now in the sources. Mayor Zoran Mamdani took office at the start of 2026 as an elected Democratic Socialist.
Right.
But his platform wasn't about, abstract global revolution. He advocates for what he calls pothole socialism.
Pothole socialism,
Right.
which is a highly pragmatic approach to radical politics. It focuses on direct, tangible, material relief for the working class.
So what does that actually look like on the ground?
We're talking about city-owned grocery stores to combat food prices, aggressive tenant protections, trash containerization, and free public transit.
Interesting.
Because traditional liberal management has lost credibility due to the sheer unaffordability of urban life. Candidates who promise that the local government will directly provide basic daily needs are finding massive electoral success.
It makes total sense when you look at the incentives. If the federal government is gridlocked and you literally cannot afford your rent or your groceries, a local politician saying, "I'm going to make your bus free and build a city-owned grocery store so you can eat," is going to win your vote.
Oh, absolutely.
But here's the thing. If a city is going to build a public grocery store or make all the buses free, that requires a massive amount of capital. Cities have to borrow that money. They have to issue municipal bonds. And that reliance on debt brings us to how this legitimacy crisis is impacting the broader financial sector.
Exactly. The legitimacy recession isn't contained to street protests or mayoral races. It extends deep into the economic plumbing of the country.
Right.
We have a brilliant analysis here from Amit Saru, a professor of finance at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He warns that the U.S. is facing a credibility recession across all markets, which poses a systemic threat to economic stability.
He specifically points to the Federal Reserve in the briefing. And the Fed's independence is absolutely crucial, right? It's supposed to be a buffer so that monetary policy setting interest rates, controlling the money supply, isn't just used as a tool for short-term electoral politics.
Right, it's meant to be impartial.
But that independence is under intense threat right now.
And when markets suspect that political interference will steer interest rates rather than hard economic data, the Fed's signals lose their power.
It just becomes noise.
Yeah. But Professor Saru points out that the risk goes far beyond the Fed. He highlights the massive growth of opaque shadow banking institutions and highly leveraged hedge funds operating largely outside traditional banking regulations.
Okay, explain the mechanism there for us. How does a hedge fund create a systemic risk for the average person's economy?
So these hedge funds are buying up massive amounts of U.S. treasuries, which is government debt, using hidden leverage. Because they lack transparency, if they suddenly face financial stress and have to unwind their massive positions rapidly, it could cause massive liquidity shocks in the core treasury markets.
Oh, wow.
And because the treasury market is the bedrock of the global financial system, a shock there spills over into pension funds, corporate payrolls, and everyday banking.
And then on the other end of the financial spectrum, you have the cryptocurrency industry.
Right.
Crypto desperately needs regulatory clarity to achieve true legitimacy and integration. But the sources note that instead of fighting for clear, transparent rules of the road, parts of the industry are just tethering themselves to political personalities.
Which Professor Saru notes is a fundamental misstep. Crypto cannot claim to be decentralized and immune to government overreach while simultaneously relying on populist political endorsements to survive.
It needs institutional credibility and a clear legal framework, not a hype man. So, what does this all mean for you, the listener? Professor Saru ties this entire structural crisis together by defining what we're seeing as epistemic warfare.
Yes, epistemic warfare. It's the breakdown of our ability to agree on what is fundamentally true.
Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Epistemic warfare essentially means a war over reality itself.
Right.
If we can't agree on basic facts like whether an inflation report from the government is mathematically real or politically rigged, or whether a court ruling is based on law or bribery, then markets literally cannot function.
They really can't.
Because at the end of the day, a market is basically just trust turned into numbers. When that trust vanishes, investors price in instability. It threatens the U.S. dollar's standing as the global reserve currency, and it means everything from your personal bank deposit to the global supply chain gets shakier.
That is the core danger. Trust is not just a social nicety, you know. It is the fundamental currency of a functioning democracy and a stable economy. Once you interpret institutions merely as factional instruments that are either captured by your team or the enemy team, democratic deliberation and economic predictability become nearly impossible.
So, to bring this all back to you listening right now, if you have been feeling completely exhausted by the news lately, if you find yourself far more worried about the total at the grocery checkout line and the price on the gas pump than you are about the latest political outrage trending online, you need to know you are not alone.
You are definitely not alone.
You are the majority. You are part of that 62% mixed middle.
Your exhaustion is entirely rational, and it is backed by the data we've looked at today. We've traced how a slow, steady collapse in institutional trust was severely compounded by a $100 billion war-driven fuel shock.
Which is just devastating.
It is. That acute everyday pain caused the majority of Americans to simply walk away from the national discourse to focus on daily survival. And that exit left a massive vacuum that the loudest, most radicalized voices eagerly filled.
That silence we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive, it isn't apathy. It's self-preservation. You stopped listening to the referees because the game stopped serving your basic needs.
Which this raises an important question, perhaps the most critical one going forward.
What's that?
If this massive legitimacy recession was so deeply accelerated by an acute external material shock, specifically gas prices and the Iran war, could it be reversed just as quickly if those material conditions improve?
Oh, that's a great point. If the war ends, inflation cools down, and the cost of living actually stabilizes, do the fans eventually come back to the bleachers? Will they ever trust the whistle again? Or have they torn up their tickets for good?
It's the million-dollar question.
It really is. Something to think about the next time you turn on the news and see everyone shouting. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into these sources today. Stay curious, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll see you next time.